And so that's the struggle that humanity is going through right now. And so that symbolizes the struggle for humanity to ascend as us struggling to ascend. Okay, we need to do that. We need to address these things and we need to ascend. Then we can enter the new era of peace. Hello, my friends. It is January 2nd, and I said I wasn't going to do a video this week, but my wife and I had this wonderful discussion this morning, and I changed my mind. So I lied, I guess. Anyways, we were talking about the symbolism of what's going on in society right now with all the political upheaval and so on and so forth, and that the spiritual symbolism of this is the the ego versus the divine nature, so to speak. So the ego represents the government, all right, and as just as an individuals, the ego needs to be brought into subjection. Now, there's a lot of stuff out there going around about how you need to kill the ego. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm not here to argue what that or not. But the ego needs to be brought into subjection. And this symbolizes the government perfectly because what happens is when you let the ego run the show, that's when things go amok. And so we're letting the government run the show, whereas the people are supposed to be the masters of government, right? And so that's the struggle that humanity is going through right now. And so that symbolizes the struggle for humanity to ascend, okay? My wife came up with this concept and I thought it was brilliant. And so here I am talking about it. And her and I have talked one of these days, we're going to get her on here and we'll have a kind of a podcast discussion like we do on many mornings. We talk about all kinds of this stuff. And we're into looking at the symbolism of everything. And so that's what the government symbolizes. It symbolizes the ego of humanity, if you will, and not just in America, all across the world. So we're seeing a lot of upheaval. And and the ego, when its power is threatened, just like government, it will fight to the bitter end to retain that power. And it will use deception, use debauchery, it'll use crime. And so it's the classical carnal or animal nature versus the divine nature written about in the ancient wisdom and the scriptures. Okay? It's the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder, so to speak. So the symbolism is quite profound. And yeah, it's a real struggle that we're going through right now, but the symbolism just struck me. It struck me as just being so accurate. The reason this is all happening is so that we can address it. It's bubbling up all the things that we need to address that have been unaddressed for a long time. And just like with an individual, things come up to be addressed. And if they're not addressed, they get more intense and more intense until a day of crisis comes that forces you to either address it or succumb to whatever that may be. And sometimes that can even be death. So we need to address these things. I always say that all things work for good. You've probably heard me say this many times before if you've listened to this channel much. And this is actually working for our good because it's giving us a chance to address it. And the people are ascending to a higher plane, at least on the mental plane and on the spiritual plane, so to speak, because now the people are awake and they're not putting up with the government being in charge anymore. It's we the people, my friends. This also brings me to a point that I want to make. A lot of people are looking to something or some leader or some person to save us, save the day for us. For a lot of people, that's Trump. Okay. And while a leader can be helpful and do a lot of good and facilitate a lot of good, we have to not, we have to be aware of not falling into the ego trap of putting, just replacing one ego for the next ego leader, so to speak. Trying to keep it within my analogy somewhat. We, nobody can save us, folks. We have to save ourselves. Okay. Our leader is not our savior. Like I said, they can do a lot of good. Well, they can be a force for good and for change. We can't put them on a pedestal as our savior. Okay. That's an important point to remember. We have to do the work. Okay. They can facilitate a lot of it happening, but it's at our beckon and call. It's because of our will that they're in there, and they're there to do our will. When we let them take the reins and take over without imposing our will on them, I hate to say imposing, without making them aware of what our will is. And if they don't do our will, we need to get them out of there. Okay. Now I know that sometimes seems difficult, and we're kind of in a post-traumatic stress phase right now because of all the things that have happened that we have felt helpless to change. But now change is upon us. People are awake and they're paying attention, and they're not going to put up with this stuff anymore. Okay. And so that's putting the ego in its place. But the ego is going to fight like hell to keep its power, or, if you will, the government. Does that make sense? So, again, what's going on the physical plane is symbolized in the spiritual as us struggling to ascend. Okay. We need to do that. We need to address these things and we need to ascend. Then we can enter the new era of peace, brotherhood, love, and cooperation, and head towards that golden era, my friends. Isn't that what we want for humanity? Isn't that what we need? So just keep that in mind. I'm going to keep this short and sweet, and I just wanted to share that all with you, my friends. And I wanted to give my wife the credit for coming up with that because I thought it was pretty profound, you know. And those are those intuitive moments, when things pop into your brain, and it may or may not be from you, but sometimes you can tell. But anyways, I thought that was great. So I want to wish everybody a happy new year and a prosperous new year and a loving and kind and wonderful new year. And remember, folks, when you see something negative happening, something bad happening, like some of the attacks and the bombs and crap that are going off, just remember, all challenges are opportunities. And all of these opportunities are opportunities to ascend, to rise above it all. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to ignore it completely. Sure, we can try and deal with these things on the physical plane when we can, when we need to, but we need to balance the negativity with looking for the good and looking for the positive. Okay. You've heard me say this before. There's always two sides to the coin. There's the dark and the light, but they're both on the same spectrum. Okay. We need to try to come to center. And I give the analogy of looking at a beautiful sunset. Without dark and light, you wouldn't be able to see it at all because of you need the contrast. And that's what the negativity is for, is to contrast the good so that we can appreciate the good even more and more in depth and understand it more. And I've often said that we are here experiencing what we are not. And that's why we experience a lot of these bad things. Some people disagree with that, and that's okay. I get it. I had a hard time wrapping my mind around it the first when I first started realizing it, because it seems to go against everything that we've been brought up to believe and understand. And that puts us in the dark night of the soul here. All the things that we thought we believed in are turning out to be lies and half truths. And so the whole thing is crumbling. And so that puts you in what we call the dark night of the soul. And that's what humanity is in right now. We're in the dark night of the soul, but we're going to come out of this thing into a brighter and more loving future. Okay. That's the purpose of dark and light, is so that we can grow, so the soul can expand. I also just made a post on X about an NDE that's one of the most profound NDEs I have ever read and listened to. And I put a link to it there. And I also did it on my Facebook page. Go listen to that. It has a lot of wisdom about why we're here, what's going on, and how things work. It's very profound. It's one of the few that I've listened to multiple times. All right, my friends, have a great new year and a great rest of your day, evening, afternoon, and we will talk to you soon.